So today I'm going to talk about the politics of social spending in China, especially the role of career incentives. I don't think this right now makes any sense to you, but hopefully at the end of my talk, you'll know what I'm saying. So Christina just gave us a very detailed explanation about her research, especially about how labor welfare, the labor protection works in China. My study, on the other hand, tries to take care of a bigger, a broader picture, which is what about other types of social policy? What about other types of social welfare in China? And Christina also introduced us that in the area of labor policy, we do see accountability in China. So for my job here is to see if there is accountability in terms of social welfare provision in China. As we all understand studying political science, when it comes to an authoritarian regime, because there is no election, citizens have no way to vote the politician out. So if the politician do not act well, do not provide social welfare to the people, there's no way, there's no accountability for the citizens to counteract. At least that's what we've believed in and what we've known so far. So in order to study the social provision in China, I have to take into a few things into account. First of all, we all heard of the term market-preserving federalism. I think people here should all understand this, which means starting late 79, starting from the economic reform, China has decentralized its authority to local governments, so local governments can try to pursue economic growth and other growth in other areas at its own effort. So in terms of the social welfare provision, it's the same. Local governments are actually responsible for providing social goods to the people. What types of social goods are we talking about here? I'm talking about not just labor union protection. I'm talking about pensions. I'm talking about social security. I'm talking about education and health. All types of social welfare are actually provided by local governments. In that case, we can look at the variation of local social welfare provision. This is showing the variation in social spending at the provincial level in China. We can see the bottom x-axis, it shows the provinces. And on the left, it shows the social spending as a share of total budget. So the higher, the better. We can see, for example, at the right-hand side, ranked number 1 is Liaoning. It provides more than 30% of its total budget in forms of social welfare to the people. On the other hand, on the left-hand side is Tibet. It only provides less than 20%, so there is a great variation, almost twice. Why do we see this kind of variation? What explains this? Is it because of the economy? Because Tibet is poor, so the government doesn't have money to provide social welfare to the people. Well, if that's the case, why do we see Liaoning, which is not so well off? It's okay, it's doing okay, let's put it that way. It provides more than, for example, Shanghai or Beijing, the two cities we know that are the richest in China. They do not provide as much as Liaoning does. Is it unemployment rate here? In order to find that out, I run across analysis. So the red line here shows the unemployment rate. As we can see, the unemployment rate here doesn't lie as nicely as the social welfare provision. So no, it's not the unemployment rate. In fact, we should believe that the higher unemployment rate, the government will provide more social welfare to the people. But in Tibet, the unemployment rate is high too. The government just doesn't provide as much social welfare. So the implication of this is, well, I'm sorry, I'm a big fan of pictures. I like to throw pictures and tell stories in my talk. So this is an example in education. We can see this picture is actually from Shanghai. So, you know, these kids, school kids, they have very nice tables, chairs, air-conditioned classrooms. What about other places? This is a rural area in Guangdong. You can see a dramatic comparison right here. What's even more dramatic is, it's actually melodramatic, is these two pictures. They are from the countryside from Shanxi. So they don't even have chairs, they don't even have table, they don't even have lights. They rely on the moonlight, which is not joking. It still exists nowadays in China. So what explains this kind of variation in social welfare provision? Is it the economy? We just saw that probably not. Is it the people's needs like the demographics or like the employment rate? Probably not. What I believe in is there is a political story behind this social welfare provision. And what I will argue here is there is still accountability in China. It works indirectly through the center based on politicians' career ambition. So basically, instead of bottom up like in democracy, where citizens vote to decide whether or not the politicians are doing a good job, it's through the center. It's a top-down mechanism. I'll explain in a second, so please be patient. Hopefully you're intrigued as well. So basically, there is a central-local conflict in China, which I believe we're all familiar with this. Beijing has an overarching interest in providing social welfare to maintain social stability so as to stay in power, as the name of this talk, Harmonious Society in Action. That's what they're trying to do right now. And we can see from numerous examples. For example, the pension program and the national health program is 97 and 99. The center is trying to implement this kind of national standards to ensure the minimum provision of pensions, of health. However, not all local officials share the same perspective. In the study of Chinese politics, we have identified that local officials tend to have short time horizon. They are not worried too much about the survival of the regime per se. They care more about the survival, or to be more blatantly, obvious, their money, their own pocket, their life, their kids' life, or their welfare, their own welfare. According to this is actually a statistics which is not formal. It's from a Hong Kong newspaper. According to this informal statistics, in 2007, local officials in China, they spent 300 billion yuan, which is $45 billion on vehicle purchase. They spent 200 billion yuan on government-sponsored traveling. But they only spent less than 200 billion yuan on health for the people in 2007. So I don't know if this is safe to say that local officials care more about their own vehicles that they're driving, or about their traveling, their leisure, and they don't care as much about the health of the people in China. If this doesn't persuade you, I have another good story. I think we all remember in 2008, there was a it was a tragedy, a disaster, an earthquake. I forgot what Richter scale. In Sichuan, yes. So tens of thousands of people died from that tragedy. And a lot of them actually were staying in temporary shelter in 08 and early 09. So this picture is from a county named, I'm sorry, I forgot the name. I was so traumatized by this story. But it was in Sichuan. So in early 09, when I was in Sichuan, this story got out on the internet. So basically the county officials, they got a lot of money from the center government because, of course, the center wants to put money into these funds so they can put these people back to their lives. So instead of helping these people, it's called Beichuan County, now I recall. The Beichuan County officials, they spend millions of dollars on buying luxury cars. Not joking. To give you two examples, these are the luxury cars they bought. Well, these are the only models we know because these two models are four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive. So according to those officials, you know, it's all-wheel drive. They need all-wheel drive cars because all the roads were devastated. So they need all-wheel drive cars to search for survivors. And they need GPS to search for survivors. Ironically, it was like half a year after the earthquake. So enough about the sad stories. How does Beijing control local elites? So in the study of Chinese politics again, we believe that the personnel appointment power is one instrument of control for the center. Basically, the center gets to decide which provincial leader can be promoted, will be promoted, when will they be promoted, or where are they going instead of being promoted to the center. However, there's one thing we missed in the literature, or at least in the study of personnel appointment power, that is, not all politicians in China, they want to be promoted to the center. This might seem odd here from the United States point of view. If you were the governor of New York, why wouldn't you want to run for White House? Well, this is actually not so, this is actually not so unique in terms of developing countries. We see this in Brazil, in Mexico as well. Basically, this is called localistic career preferences. Imagine, in a developing country, would you like to be a big fish in a small pond at the local community where you can be a local emperor? Or would you like to be a small fish in the vast ocean of Beijing politics? I guess people have different preferences, but I wouldn't be surprised that some people would like to stay at the local level so they can be the local king. They can be the king. Imagine one province in China is almost like the size of California. Why would you want to go to Washington, D.C. when you have so much money and so much other profits to get when you're at the local level? So this actually gives us a good opportunity to test if this promotion mechanism works. If local leaders want to be promoted, they should try to spend more on social policy to show the center that I'm loyal to you, I share your perspective, I want to provide social welfare, I care about the same thing, I care about the regime's survival. So basically, this is how I derived my career incentive argument. It's called upward accountability. Again, like I just said, the Beijing government has, or the Beijing authority has this kind of mechanism to make sure those local leaders who want to be promoted to the center will do things as they require. However, it's not perfect. If local leaders, they want to stay at local level, they would rather spend on projects that are tied with their local cohorts, their business cohorts, to connect with local interest groups. Essentially, they can get kickbacks, or more importantly, they can get future influence so they can secure a better, a more lucrative local retirement job instead of going to Beijing. So 2 hypotheses. The first one, this is called concurrentist hypothesis. So if I claim the center wants to spend more on social policy, one easy way to test it is for those local leaders who also hold a central position. They should spend more than their colleagues who do not hold a central position. This, again, might sound a little bizarre from Americans' point of view, but it's actually not so weird from Chinese point of view or from a communism's point of view. Basically, a lot of Chinese, not a lot, I'm sorry, I take that back. Some Chinese provincial officials, they hold the top central positions. I'll go into more detail later. So the second hypothesis would be my bigger picture. When local leaders aspire, when they have the ambition to be promoted to the center, they spend more on social policy. So how do I measure, first of all, my dependent variable? How do I measure social spending? So I use government spending on social policy, and I use it as a share of total budget instead of a percentage of GDP. I know most people use the percentage of GDP, but here my argument tries to show the governmental effort on trying to take care of the people. So I think as a share of total budget makes more sense. What are social policy? Again, a quick recap. Social security and welfare, which is basically pensions, education, and health. I aggregate and I do separate measures of the social policy. So how do I measure the independent variable, my explanatory variables? The first one, local leaders who already serve concurrently as a central leadership role. This is quite intuitive. In the 16th Politburo, which is the top decision-making body in China, there's around 24. It's usually between 22 to 25 people, 25 members. So in the 16th Politburo, there were 24 members in total. 10 of them actually hold local, provincial level position. During the 17th, 8 of them hold provincial level positions. So that's how I get this number. That's how I measure the concurrentness. So independent variable number 2, ambitions toward the center. This is the key. How do I measure ambition? We all know that China is not as free, liberal. It's not a democracy where I can go and interview local officials, say, hey, excuse me, but could you tell me if you want to go to the center or do you prefer to stay at the local level? I don't think I can do that. I don't think, as a matter of fact, anybody has done that before. So instead of asking people or doing survey, I use 2 proxies. The first one is called politicians spending on dining and entertaining. So we've seen vehicle purchase, we've seen travel. I bet you guys haven't heard of dining and entertaining. So basically, in order to show that dining and entertaining spending is a good, legit measure, I check it with politicians' promotion eligibility, which I'll explain later. The second measure is the go-getter measure. So instead of measuring beforehand, I try to see for those politicians who successfully advanced to the center, if they did spend more before they were promoted. So first of all, measure 1, dining entertaining. It's unpublished budgetary report where I acquired through my fieldwork. I can brag more about this, which I tend to do, but since I don't have enough time here, I'll brag later. It's a special personal allowance that politicians tend to use to basically increase his or her local influence, so he or she can ensure and get a local retirement job in the future. So I'll give you a more concrete example. It is actually all you can spend in China, or actually maybe not really all you can spend, but to me it seems like all you can spend. Why? When I was there, not because I was a PhD candidate, because they don't really care about the fact that I'm a PhD candidate. Not because I was Susan Shirk's student, not because they care Susan Shirk was an ex-governmental official in America, but because of my family connection. They want my family friend to invest, so they treated us and they treated me. So on average, they spent $200 US on me each time at the restaurant. I'm not talking about each night, I'm talking about each time at a restaurant, which is crazy because for those of you who've been to China who are familiar with China, $200. Well, actually, it's not that hard if you order a few bottles of Chinese white wine, then you meet the quota. So $200, it's actually very much. It's actually a lot. If we look at the UC system, for example, where I came from, UCSD, we only allow $64 per person for guest speakers, and we have to have itemized receipt, 64 in total. So that's the dramatic comparison right there. Again, how do we know that government officials who spend more on dining and entertaining are less interested or are not interested in a central career? How do we know that? I believe a lot of people would have different opinions. In order to persuade you I double check it with promotion eligibility. So basically, in China, if we all know, provincial level politicians are forced to retire at the age of 65. So basically, when you're after the age of 60, you have no prospect of moving up to Beijing. That's how it's worked. When you're 65, you gotta step down. So I try to see the correlation between age and dining and entertaining spending. Again, before, if I were a Chinese official at the provincial level, before the age of 60, I could or I could not have the option, or I could choose or not to choose to try to work to be promoted to Beijing. I could choose to stay, or I could choose to be promoted to Beijing before 60, but after 60, I pretty much have no choice because I'll be forced to retire. What should I do after I'm 60? I'll try to spend more on dining and entertaining so I can increase my local influence. So in the future, I'll get a good retirement job at the local level. On the left-hand side is the dining and entertaining variable. This is age. The older, when I'm past 60, I'll try to spend more. So this is the non-parametric smoothing technique. It increases. The older you get, you do not think you have as much opportunity to be promoted. So increase your opportunity, your chance to spend on dining and entertaining. So measure 2 is go-getter. Again, the successful cases. So it's a retrospective analysis. Of course, for some statistics junkies, this is not a good analysis because I'm actually treating the outcome as the cause. But again, I don't think this doesn't inform us nothing because it actually tells us something about if you want to succeed, you'll spend more. This shows us the pattern that for those successful politicians, they actually did spend more, so it backs me up a little bit more. And a little different than the previous 2 measures, the provincial leaders here are party secretaries and governors because governors have a good chance to be promoted to the center as well. So this, basically it's time series cross-section data set. If I were at my job talk and you guys were like professors from, with doing really complicated statistical analysis, I'll go through this very carefully, but I guess we can relax here. So basically I try to take care of potential problems, not fancy work. This is just standard, so there should be no problem with my statistical work. These are the controls I include. For example, the richer the province, these 2, unemployment rate, demography, marketization. If the province is more marketized, government should have less responsibility to provide social welfare to the people. People have that kind of argument. And I have the expected signs for these. The red shows the actual results. And again, I would go into more detail about this if I had more time, but this kind of numbers mean less to us or to normal human beings. It doesn't mean anything to me either. I personally think this means a lot more. That's why I do this graph. For example, for socio-economic variables, we can see a 10% annual growth rate results in a 0.6% increase in social spending. Local revenue increase actually decreases the social spending, which is actually weird and sad because the richer the government is, they do not necessarily spend on social welfare. On the other hand, we look at the political incentives variables, which are my variables. We can see it has significantly more effect on social spending. For example, if the provincial leader also holds central position, he or she spends 14.6% more on average than his or her colleagues. A 10% decrease in dining and entertaining. If you spend less on dining and entertaining, 10% less, that means 12.5% more in social spending. And the go-getter party secretary and go-getter governor, they did spend more before they were promoted to the center. Again, 14.4% in social spending. It doesn't sound too much. How much is it? Let me give you a more clearly described graph. This was Li Keqiang when he was Liao Ning's party secretary, before he was promoted to the center. 05 and 07, he got to Liao Ning in 04. This is the difference for 14%, a huge jump. Again, if you're wondering why it's constantly increasing slowly, well, many other examples, probably economic growth or other variables. But that jump is something we cannot overlook. Some surprising findings. Expectation 1, I just talked about this. Richer provinces spend more on social policy. Nope. Governments are responsive to demographics and unemployment. Nope. Going back to my substantive effect graph, you can see the richer the government is, the less they spend. And demography and unemployment actually do not matter in terms of social spending. So the conclusion is it's not really the people's needs or the provincial resources. It's actually the politicians' political ambition that really matters. So the broader implication of my research is, first of all, there is still accountability in China. Second, the quality of governance depends on whether or not the incentive structure shaped by the political institutions can motivate politicians. In democracies, we have electoral incentives. That's why it's bottom-up. But in China, there is a career ladder and promotional pattern for provincial leaders who want to be promoted to the center. Again, it's not perfect, but at least there is some accountability in China still. Thank you very much.